Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Hey, Caroline, how are you today?
I am so good, Bryce. I am so excited about today's record.
Yeah, I am too. I am very optimistic about today's recordings. We've got a couple of awesome guests on with us. But normally when we record these episodes, I like to think that either one of us, like if something happened, we'd be able to talk about that subject and put on an entertaining show. This episode, I don't think, I know I'm not, but I think you fit in the same category as me. Maybe not as qualified to discuss in detail today's topic.
That would be correct. I approached today's episode very much like the ones where we have like a famous guest on the show that we are just kind of like interviewing them because they have that expert knowledge. I am very comfortable saying that I do not know that much about Doctor Who.
Yeah, so of course today's topic we are chatting all about Doctor Who. Before we came on the air, we were talking about how you with spelling Doctor Who, like you can't put the DR, you have to spell out Doctor. I've already even before we hit record, I'm learning so much about Doctor Who, and it's really interesting too because I think this is a perfect topic to have on this show because I know obviously Doctor Who is so popular when it comes to pop culture and mainstream media. And then also, of course, Doctor Who is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. So I had, before we chatted about doing this episode, I had no idea Doctor Who had been around for that long.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic for an episode because people, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I'm looking forward to finding out, but people seem to either know a lot about Doctor Who or not very much. I don't know if you can be a medium Doctor Who fan. That's one of the questions I guess I will ask our guests.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. First, want to welcome back to the show returning guest. He actually gave me this episode idea. I happened to be walking by the customer service desk at our Stanley E. Milner Library, and he pulled me aside and he's like, "Hey, Doctor Who's celebrating its 60th anniversary in November. You should do something."
He did the exact same thing to me. I forget why I was at Milner, but definitely passed it along. So I'm very glad we made it happen.
Yeah. Because if you wouldn't have said anything, I don't know if we'd be doing this episode. So, of course, welcome back to the show, Diego Ibarra. Diego, I was looking back through my notes, and I believe the last episode you were on, it was it was a couple of years ago, was our Oscar snubs episode.
It's been a while. A lot of things have happened between now and then, as I seem to recall. What a crazy couple of years.
And then, of course, we also want to welcome back to the show. She's known as the best friend of Overdue Finds, making her now. We do have a stats team here on Overdue Finds, and according to our stats team, this is actually her 17th appearance, if you include bonus episodes, which of course we do. So we want to welcome back to the show, Kate Gibson. Kate, you were last on the show for our shelved episode where we kind of asked, why are they having their staff meeting on the public floor? So I've got a question for you. Since shelved, have you had, as the manager of the Strathcona branch, have you had a meeting on the floor?
No staff meetings on the public floor. That would be very inappropriate. I also want to point out, I mentioned to Caroline that we should have a Doctor Who podcast, and we were having lunch together, and I said, I hope you're having one, and if you are, you better invite me. So I'm glad you invited me.
Well, from my conversations with both of you, Kate especially over the last, years or so that we've been working on various projects together, I know you're both huge Doctor Who fans, and I think we're in for a real treat today. Caroline and I know are both looking forward to learning so much more about it. my knowledge is basically the theme music scared me as a child, and that's kind of where the knowledge stops and ends. But yeah, I think we're gonna have a blast today. But before we get talking all about Doctor Who, let's share some of our recent Overdue Finds picks. Kate, what have you been enjoying lately?
I watched the new Netflix show Bodies. I don't know if any of you have heard of that or watched it. And it's based on a comic series, and you can get the comic book through the library. It's about a murder that happens, and 4 different detectives who are investigating the murder in 4 different time periods, because the same body shows up in 4 different time zones. And it's perfect for today, too, because we're talking time travel.
Yeah, interesting. I have not heard of that show, but it sounds really interesting. Like, what are the time periods where they're investigating?
It's the 1890s, the 1940s, early to like nowadays, and a little bit of a spoiler for the first episode. Sometime in the future.
Ooh, nice. That sounds really fun. I'm definitely gonna have to check that one out. Diego, it's been way too long since you've last been on the show with us. What have you been enjoying lately?
Yeah, so it's kind of a rediscover for me. So I've been a fan of Elvis Costello for quite a long time. I can't say that I'd necessarily sort of go all the way back to the 80s. I was but a wee babby back then. But in the 90s especially, I sort of started getting more into his stuff. And he was in an incredibly sort of experimental sort of phase back then. So he would produce his own albums with his own sound, but then he'd do things like team up with the Brodsky Quartet to do an entire sort of concept album based around like snail mail, like actual physical letters people write each other. And there's another collaboration he did, which also, for a lot of people, just sort of struck them as being completely out of left field. He teamed up with a sort of classic sort of pop writer by the name of Burt Bacharach. Mid-90s, they put out a brilliant album called Painted from Memory, which is an album of their collaboration. So you've got Bacharach's sweetness, and you've also got Elvis Costello's sensibilities, and also at the time probably some of the best vocal range he's ever had. And they put out an amazing album called Painted from Memory. Now, this album itself is not in our collection, but what I have noticed, and why I've been thinking about it again, is they've just re-released it as part of a set called The Songs of Bacharach and Costello. So there's a 2-disc set. First disc is Painted from Memory. Second set is a lot of other performances of Costello, of Bacharach's work, and also some covers of some songs that they've done together as well. Getting back into it after really not really listening to it for 20 years or more at this point here, I'm really kind of struck now, like how much more of an appreciation I have for this music right now. It is very powerful. It is just very sweet. It is incredibly romantic. It is at sometimes sexy. Just a really solid listen all the way through. Now, we do have the songs of Bacharach and Costello in our collection. If you don't get a chance to listen to the whole album just yet, listeners at home, check out some of the stuff on YouTube or Spotify. I would recommend listening, if you had listened to one track, I Still Have This Other Girl would be my recommendation. If you have to listen to 2 tracks, go for Long Division. But what an absolutely perfect piece of pop that's kind of sounding more and more sort of relevant. I don't know if it's just because of the time period or it's because I'm becoming an old codger. I don't know. It's one of the two.
Caroline, how about you? What have you been enjoying lately?
I was in a mood lately, and that mood was I need to watch My Cousin Vinny. So I watched it. It's available. You can stream it through Hoopla, and that's what I did. And I watched it, and it was funny, and I laughed and really enjoyed myself. It came out in 1992, and it, like many movies that are from a period of time ago. Not every line or reference or joke holds up or might be made today, but My Cousin Vinny is the story of a New York lawyer played by Joe Pesci, and his girlfriend Mona Lisa, played by Marissa Tomei. He gets called down to the deep south to rescue a cousin who is in jail for murder. They did not commit this murder, but they have the cousin and his friend have been put on trial for it. Vinny, the lawyer in the family, he comes and just runs into issue after issue after issue. It gets so funny as it goes along. The frustration, like, you actually learn quite a lot about the legal system and the trial procedure. Just the supporting characters are great. I just love Marissa Tomei, and she is so good in this role. Yeah. If you're in a mood and you're not quite sure what movie to watch, check in with yourself. Is it My Cousin Vinny? What have you been enjoying, Bryce?
Yeah, so I've got a little bit of a different pick here today. So a couple of weeks ago, I'm not sure if everybody on here watches Saturday Night Live on the regular like I do, but a few weeks ago we were actually treated to a new classic episode of SNL where host Nate Bargatze played George Washington in a sketch simply known as Washington's Dream, where he talks about the metric system and how he has a dream for a country with its own system of weights and measures. And I cannot do that sketch justice, but if you have not seen it, I highly encourage you to look it up. A lot of kind of talk about the metric system and all of that fun stuff. But the interesting part about that episode was I remember when it was announced that Nate Bargatze was going to be hosting, and a lot of people online were like, who's Nate Bargatze? I have no idea who this is. But, of course, after this episode, it's kind of been named already as one of the new classic episodes of Saturday Night Live. Most people now know that he's a hilarious stand-up comedian, and I noticed that we have a copy of his latest comedy special album called Hello World, which you can stream on Hoopla. This is a great special, and it's funny because before this came out, me and some friends saw him perform at the Jube here in Edmonton, and this was before the special came out, and he was actually, a lot of this material that we saw him perform live was what ended up on this album, and it's also on, I believe the actual special itself is on Amazon Prime that you can watch. But the special is hilarious. He talks about everything from turning 40 to parenting, golfing with his wife, and he tells an absolutely hilarious story about going to McDonald's as a kid with his dad and how he maybe or maybe did not get a Happy Meal. So, as far as like Nate Bargatze's comedy goes, I would actually compare him to Jerry Seinfeld. He's actually a clean comedian, and probably, as somebody who watches a lot of stand-up specials, I actually think he's one of the overall funniest comedians working today. And what's neat too about the actual like comedy album, and we've got a ton on Hoopla that you can download, is somebody like myself who drives to work and you're stuck in traffic. These are great albums to have on and kind of make the commute go a little bit better. So yeah, if you watch that episode of SNL, I can't recommend that album enough. So definitely go check it out. All right, so let's chat all about the Doctor Who. It's funny because Caroline, I think normally we'll do some kind of on these like pop culture anniversary episodes. We'll have you do some fun facts, but let's face it. Yeah.
I am delegating this week. Yeah, I looked at it and thought, you know what? Let's just toss it over to our guests right off the bat.
You know what? I did find, before we toss it over, I just want to share an interesting tidbit because, of course, we're talking about the 60th anniversary of it. And the very first episode of Doctor Who aired on BBC on November 23rd, 1963, so 60 years ago. Now, what's interesting about that date, when I saw it on paper, I was like, that date sounds
like a Stephen King novel.
What is it? What is that special about that day, Diego?
What is so special about the day? This was, of course, the weekend where the American president, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. So this actually did put Who in a bit of trouble right from the get-go, because it was such a contentious idea for a series, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk about that first episode, but it was such a long, sort of arduous trek to sort of even create that first episode, and then they aired it, and nobody was watching. Absolutely nobody was watching, just because of what happened with JFK. So they had to wait a couple of weeks to rebroadcast it, and the numbers still weren't there. So they were almost going to be canceled after the first episode, if not for what they did in the second story. Getting into sort of the weeds a little bit here. So there was the exec in charge of this show was a Canadian transplant by the name of Sidney Newman, and he had an edict very early on that if they were going to do a sci-fi show, there could be no bug-eyed monsters. So they aired An Unearthly Child, which was the first story. They actually had to shoot it twice, aired it the weekend of the JFK assassination, and again, no real response there. Re-aired it a couple of weeks later, not a great pickup, and then they figured, okay, so we're this close to being canceled. If that's going to happen, we may as well pull out the stops. It's time for the bug-eyed monsters. So they had a writer by the name of Terry Nation come up with a notion for an opponent known as the Daleks. This was a completely sort of utilitarian robot style. It was just meant to only work for that one episode. He was partially inspired by watching, if you will, sort of like Eastern European dancers in the way that they would sort of move their skirts across the stage without ever looking like they're gliding almost. So that's what he wanted for an opponent. So they created the Daleks, and it was huge. It was instantly huge. Fun fact about that, too. So I mentioned Terry Nation. Everyone's familiar with the notion of work for hire, which you create for a show, it belongs to the show. That's clearly not what was happening in 1963, because Terry Nation got to retain the rights to the screenplay, which means that he retained the rights to the Daleks, which means even to this day, every time the BBC wants to use the Daleks, they have to pay Terry Nation's family.
Let's kind of start from the beginning, though. Like we've talked about, I didn't think we would start the conversation off with JFK's assassination, but here we are. But Kate, though, I just want to start at the very beginning, though, just in case we have some listeners like myself today, or Caroline, who aren't as familiar with Doctor Who. I guess, very basic question, what is Doctor Who?
You say it's basic, but it's not. It's 60 years worth of history. I mean, at its most basic, it is a TV series about an alien who has a special time machine that goes through time and space, and he goes on adventures, saving planets. At its most basic, that's what it is. But it's more than that. Of course, it's more than that. It is a wonderful series of just humanity, and especially like the Doctor always comes back and saves Earth because Earth is special and he cares about it. And so it kind of travels through Earth's history, through time and space, and he takes companions, usually from Earth, along with them, and they get to see the universe in all its glory, and it's very hopeful, and it's very loving, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful show. But again, it's also 60 years worth of episodes, so that is only the tip of the iceberg of what it is and can be.
So he's an alien.
He is an alien. He's a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey.
Okay.
Yes.
And we know that right off the bat, right?
I mean, not right away. If you go back to The Unearthly Child, it's not right away. But one of the key things, of course, about Doctor Who, and I should have mentioned this, is Time Lords regenerate. So one of the reasons why the show is able to go on for 60 years is when a Time Lord dies, they don't die. They just become someone else. And they remember who they were, but they're a whole other person with a whole other personality. So they can just recast someone else to be the Doctor. And it's
very
allowed
clever.
it to be all sorts of things, yes. I mean, there's a technical reason, which I'm sure Diego can share, about why they did that in the first place, because that wasn't the plan when it started, but yeah, it worked out really well for them.
So the first Doctor that they've cast was a wonderful actor by the name of William Hartnell. He was cast to play the Doctor. Not yet revealed to be a Time Lord, not yet revealed to be from the planet Gallifrey, just a potentially alien man who had, of course, his time-traveling TARDIS ship and traveled with his granddaughter, Susan. So Hartnell himself, as an actor, he was not what we would consider to be like terribly old. He was 55 years old, but he was an established character actor. He had a great gaunt frame, so you put a wig on him, he just looks a lot older than he already was. But in real life, he was also battling a degenerative neurological condition, which was affecting his memory and also, if you will, sort of like his ability to do the part, and which is a shame because he threw himself into it. Like, he absolutely loved it. But considering like all of the shows that they're doing were live to tape, the level of sort of flubs that Hartnell was becoming more and more responsible for simply could not be ignored. So the producers knew that if this series was going to continue, they'd have to find a way to continue without Hartnell. And because they were very much after the first 3 years, still in a headspace where they can just throw whatever against the wall and hope that it stuck. Yes, so they came up with the notion of regeneration, where the Doctor would simply move on to sort of like his next form because that's what his people do, apparently. So everyone talks about how the most important Doctors are the first two. Hartnell because he started, but also the second Doctor, who was another actor by the name of Patrick Troughton, because he had the job of making sure this absolutely gonzo idea actually stuck. And stick it did. And he did, where he's also incredibly fondly remembered as well. He was not playing the same character with the same mannerisms. He had a definite sort of more of a chaotic, upbeat sort of approach to how he sort of went through his adventures and how he related to his companions. So that was something they got a chance to sell. So not only did the Doctor physically look different, but they were effectively operating slightly different as well. Same base motivations, but how they problem solve would wind up being very different. We've had a great breadth of Doctors ever since then.
Who is your Doctor, Diego?
Who's my Doctor?
Yeah.
12.
Ah, nice.
That is actor Peter Capaldi, who is probably before then best known for a very sort of foul-mouthed series called In the Cut. But if you're American audiences might also recognize him for his roles in films as diverse as Paddington and also The Suicide Squad. He's absolutely brilliant, and for me, it was probably sort of the better half of showrunner Stephen Moffat's run.
See, here I'm gonna have to argue because my Doctor is the 11th Doctor.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with 11. We just want different things.
Very much so. To me, the 11th Doctor is like the second Doctor in many ways. He's that chaotic, fun, silly, but still wise character. So I don't know. I love him.
Who was your first Doctor?
I started watching in 2010. I knew it existed, but I didn't really watch it. I was aware of it from a young age.
Yeah.
So I binge watched the new Who, as it's called, when it was revived with Christopher Eccleston in 2005. I binge watched from the episodes from 2005 to 2010. And in 2010 is when Matt Smith took over as the 11th Doctor. So I do think a part of it is that's who I kind of started watching on a more episodic basis. But also I love his style and all that kind of stuff.
For me, because I started watching when I was a young child, I want to say around like 6 or 7, if I recall, because this is when, living in Edmonton, the Spokane PBS station started airing episodes, and the episodes that they were airing were of the Fourth Doctor, as played by Tom Baker, very iconic Doctor, all curls and teeth and long scarf, and offering people jelly babies. So I didn't get a chance to watch until the 3rd episode of the first Tom Baker story, which is a story called Robot, watching it now on like high definition, nothing holds up. But when you're young and you're unsophisticated and you're watching it on an old SD tube TV, it is everything. It is absolutely everything. And I was hooked. I was just hooked by the premise of it, the fact that once one story finished, he would immediately just move on to like a completely different world, a completely different story. He'd bring his friends with him. He was always he was always cheerful. He was always the smartest guy in the room, and he'd find sort of nonviolent ways of solving problems. Although that probably didn't really occur to me when I was young.
Diego, you mentioned PBS, and I just wanted to go back to, like, we were talking about with the Kennedy assassination and it airing first in November 1963. When we say the 63 airing, that's Britain, right? Like, it's not in North America yet.
Yes. So it took a while for Doctor Who to really sort of make its way sort of overseas. And that leads into some interesting sort of complications as well. So, yes, so the BBC was producing it, and that meant that any country that was still sort of part of the former British Commonwealth was likely getting some episodes sent to them as well. And that wound up being a bit of a saving grace. The BBC was making the show, but back then, there was no notion of syndication. There was no notion of reruns. So the BBC was making the show, and after that, great, toss it in the bin. They just genuinely had no interest in it. Now, some of these other sort of affiliates in other nations did wind up saving theirs. So we have countries as diverse as, say, Australia or the former Hong Kong to really sort of thank for holding on to things as well. And then we have other cases where we had these very sort of devout fans who, because there was no such thing as VCRs back in the day, they would get actual reel-to-reel audio recorders, and they would record the broadcast audio only so that they could enjoy it later. And managed to hold on to this all this time here. So where there have been some gaps, we've had other countries and we've had fans that have stepped up to sort of bring these stories back. And in the case of some of the audio-only stories, there have actually been fully animated reconstructions based off the audio and also based off of the production stills, which the Beeb actually did hold on to.
I have just been in touch with our research department, who confirm for us that 97 episodes of Doctor Who from the 60s are no longer known to exist. 26 serials are currently incomplete.
That's the thing. When they say 96 episodes, the old episodes of Doctor Who were not a one-off show. It was usually, they were half an hour long, and they were 4 of them would make a story. So 4 or 6, depending on the story. So yeah, the number of serials is more like what you'd be looking for the stories. Yes.
Yeah, no, the classic run of Who was designed around the cliffhanger. So these were stories that when they were written out, they're meant to be 2-hour stories, 3-hour stories, but they break them up into these half-hour installments. So you'd get that fix. They'd find a way to sort of throw the good guys into some sort of danger, very much based around, if you will, almost the way that they used to run movie serials.
Classic Who, if you can watch it, it is fun. I would never recommend someone starts with that now, but they are fun to go back and see how the stories were told. And
so I asked you the question about who was your doctor and when did you start, but I'm going to ask, why did you start? What drew you to it? Do you watch a lot of sci-fi? Is this accurate to classify as sci-fi?
That's a good question. I would be tempted not to class it as sci-fi, except that occurs in space and sometimes has spacey future things. I don't know. It's not like Star Trek at all to me. I mean, the Doctor basically is a wizard who does magic. There's not like they dress it up as science, but like the terms they use are like reverse the polarity, as though that means anything. But yeah, it's to me what drew it was just. I mean, I love the fantastic, and I love adventure stories. Obviously, I'd heard a lot about it. I actually watched Sherlock before I watched Doctor Who, so I knew Stephen Moffat from Sherlock first, and I really enjoyed his style there, so that also drew me in. I also just watch a lot of BBC series, and I love British television, so I was like, why haven't I watched this thing that all these nerds like, and I'm a nerd? So therefore, that's kind of what started me, and then I was like, this is amazing, and I now have a tattoo on me that is Doctor Who related, so yeah.
So Diego, you mentioned you were much younger when you started watching Doctor Who.
Yeah.
What drew you to it?
Just the charisma of it, really. I mean, just like the fact that, like, again, like you'd have this ongoing sci-fi serial, and I didn't realize how long ago those episodes had aired, because the episodes that I started watching actually came out the year that I was born, and it took a while for them to sort of come their way to North America. So in this case, PBS was just able to air these episodes like nonstop, like every weekday they would air an episode. So there's no real sort of season gaps, no production gaps. I just got it all. As close to the streaming model as you can get.
I was going to say, you binge watched before it was binge watching.
If you will. So just the sheer sort of inventiveness of it, the fact that you had, of course, like this hero that was very much sort of like larger than life, but not in a superhero sort of way. And again, the fact that it would keep reinventing himself here. The Doctor would regenerate, of course, which was very shocking to me the first time that I saw it. But even just sort of the companions that he was traveling with, they would sort of move on as well. This is sort of like another theme of Doctor Who, where he brings along these mostly human characters, just because you need some sort of point of view character for whatever the heck is going on. But usually they move on. They'll either just sort of find that they've had enough, thank you, or maybe they'll meet a tragic end, or maybe they just due to the relationship between themselves and the Doctor, they just realize that even on a friendship level, it's just best if they just sort of call it quits. And then someone new comes in and sort of starts the cycle all over again.
So speaking of how real this is, Bryce, you've shared that you were, I think it's fair to say, scared by the music.
Yeah, like Diego, I remember this coming on PBS as well, because I recall watching, like, I don't know, the Polka Dot Door would be ending, and then all of a sudden Doctor Who would start up, and of course it's the Tom Baker one, and a lot of people have seen the opening credits for it. So it was kind of weird going from like children's programming to like this ominous music. That
can I talk a little bit about that? Because one of my goals is just to like stand over Diego Ibarra on this podcast. So the Doctor Who theme was actually composed by a different composer. His name was Ron Grainer, and he designed the theme to be just sort of generally like a lot of more poppier fun, you know. And then they gave it to was known as the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. So these were a lot of let's call them nerds that were working in the basement of the BBC, and they were experimenting with this brand new sort of like untapped field called electronic music. So Derbyshire got the score, and she's like, okay, well, we're going to do this sort of the right way or not at all. So before there even existed like a commercial synthesizer, like a year, I swear to God, a year before they released a commercial synthesizer, what she did was that she would record one note on a guitar, one note. And then she would, on analog tape, she would copy it, cut it, tape it on again, copy it, cut it, tape it on. She would start changing the speed of it so that the pitch of the note changes, copy it, cut it, pasted on and just keep working down the line. So she was working fully analog to create all these beautiful messed up sounds for the original sort of Doctor Who composition. And you can even sort of hear that. Everything you're listening to is analog for the weird kind of like swirls and the ghostly sort of like note for it. I believe she was really just sort of like running electrical current through speakers. To get the effect of the original 1963 opening credits, they basically just sort of aimed a camera at its own monitor, creating beautiful feedback that way. So they were really just sort of like going into trying to punish whatever equipment they could find in order to get the sound that they made. So if the theme ever sounds upsetting, like they went through like a lot of pain to create it the way that it did. And when Ron Grainer heard the Derbyshire arrangement, he was like, did I write this? This was a thing. I wrote this? Well, okay. As long as it gets sole credit. And he did.
Oh, yeah. But now, Delia Derbyshire has gone down in history for this and many other things, too. She is amazing.
So, obviously, Doctor Who, of course, talked about already, celebrating 60 years. There's been so many great moments and characters, storylines. Kate, I'm curious to know, do you have any favorite moments or things from the show?
As I said, the Matt Smith's 11th Doctor is my favorite Doctor. So a lot of the things that I love, a lot of the key moments for me that stand out are his... honestly, his first episode I love, and that is often how I start people into Who. You could start with Christopher Eccleston, but I often start people with Matt Smith's first episode because it's kind of a reset. It was the start of Stephen Moffat's time, so it had a little bit of a stylistic break from Russell T Davies, but it's just such a brilliant introduction to the character. He meets a child, and you kind of see it through the child's eyes in some ways, which is always a good way to think of Doctor Who. But it's got timey-wiminess, which I love, and it's got Stephen Moffat's convolutedness, which I love. Some people hate, but I love it. And so even just the first Doctor, the first episode of The 11th Doctor is a great episode to me. And then the end of that season ends with the Pandora opens and the Big Bang. And that's where he says we're all stories in the end. That season as a whole, I just absolutely adore. There are some not great episodes in it. I will say there is some. Not every episode of Doctor Who is a winner. I will say that, even as a fan, there's some that are better than others. But those kind of that bookend of that season, I absolutely love just in general. But there's just so many, like his first. Matt Smith's first Christmas episode, A Christmas Carol. Again, it does some really neat things with time travel and sort of the three ghosts and all that kind of stuff, and it's beautiful. Then later episodes with Matt Smith, there's an episode called The Doctor's Wife, where they actually give form to the TARDIS, which is what he travels in, and it's played by Saran Jones, and it's wonderful. Written by Neil Gaiman, who I love. Diego was waiting to make sure I said that. So that episode as well, it's just beautiful to see this being almost that the Doctor has traveled with for at that point almost 50 years, and given a voice, which she never has. So again, I loved that.
Bryce, do you have any favorites?
Sorry, you guys haven't had a chance to talk much.
No. You know what? I've only tried to watch maybe one episode. Is a few years ago. I think it might have been a Christmas episode, I want to say. Because it was highly recommended. I remember reading about it online. Honestly, I couldn't tell you much about it or what episode it was. I wasn't that much into it, but you know what? I respect the legacy of Doctor Who, and I think it's really cool, like how long it's been around and how many people are into it.
I feel like it has to be curate. Whenever I introduce adult friends of mine to it, I curate where they start and which episodes, honestly.
I am most familiar with Doctor Who through the lens of Inspector Spacetime, which is the version from Community that Abed gets into, I believe after Cougar Town ends, and he's really upset about that. So they find him a show that has like hundreds of back episodes, and he gets really into it. There's another episode where they go to a convention. There's a plot line where there's an American remake that takes like Inspector Spacetime and turns him into like a sexy woman who I think plays tennis or something, and just all of the things. There's a Christmas special with it, so I'm aware of Doctor Who through like pop culture lens, but definitely not the show itself. So yeah.
Dan Harmon, the creator of Community, has himself indicated that he's the Who fan, but this is very much him sort of having a nice sort of loving poke at it.
Yeah, which I like. Like, I like when people, like, when you know the source enough to play around with it. Or as Kate, when you mentioned that, like, there's clearly episodes here that you like and mean a lot to you. And then you can also admit that not all of them are ones you would necessarily want tattooed on you.
No. 60 years, yeah. There's definitely things that were better than others. Speaking of, it just reminded me of the American remake that you said for Diego. Any thoughts on the movie?
Yeah, actually, because no one's asked me what my first episode recommendation would be yet, and it actually is
the movie.
The movie, I know, and any Who fans listening right now are wishing me death. But so there's been, after Doctor Who was cancelled by the BBC in 1989, there's been a lot of attempts to try to get it back one way or another. Like a lot of like pie in the sky ideas, like Steven Spielberg was going to direct it, which apparently was a thing for like 5 minutes at some point. What wound up happening is that the BBC wound up getting to a deal with Fox, which was sort of the young, edgy network at the time, and they would produce a pilot in the form of like a TV movie, and if it caught on, they would produce more. So in this case, they actually did get the outgoing Doctor to reprise his role, just to die and regenerate into the Eighth Doctor, played by Paul McGann. And instead of doing the classic thing, they started doing what a lot of like diehard fans considered to be some very bad liberties. Like the Doctor would be involved in some sort of action set piece, or the Doctor would kiss his companion. This is all improper, very improper. And if you watch any of the new Doctor Who now, heck, just any random episode with Matt Smith, like they already went for it. Like they're already going for it. So I find that it actually does sort of better prepare what the new Who series is. It also like introduces you right away to some things that, say, the first season of Doctor Who don't necessarily do. They show you regeneration. They show you the TARDIS. They introduce the Doctor Who's Moriarty-like foe named the Master, who is another renegade Time Lord from Gallifrey. And it just sort of like has fun with the hour and a half that it runs or what have you. Like I will go from there, and then I'll bring people right to the Christopher Eccleston run, which is the 2005 introduction of New Who, because then you get to sort of show how things were in a way, and then Eccleston season starts up, and then things have changed. All of a sudden, the Doctor is the last of his people. There was a great war that he doesn't really want to talk about, and everybody's dead except for him, but he's back on Earth, and he's looking to just sort of try to get back into it. So this was a deliberate, vague mystery that Davey set up, and it would take roughly around 8 years for them to actually sort of like pull the trigger on that and actually sort of talk about what happened in the Time War. But one of my favorite episodes is actually, it's a two-parter from that very first year. And it's called The Hollow Children and The Doctor Dances. So Eccleston only did one season with Doctor Who. If you're unfamiliar with him as an actor, I recommend that everyone sort of go find this great old 90s thriller called Shallow Grave. He's in it with Ewan McGregor, and he does a fantastic role in it. He hasn't really been well used in North America otherwise. He was in Heroes. He was the really boring villain in a Thor movie. But here he shines. Like, he absolutely shines. Like, this is a Shakespearean actor we're talking about here. So all of a sudden the Doctor's showing up. He's not wearing anything flashy. He's got like a sweater on and like a black leather jacket and a shaved head, and that's his look. Deal with it. And he's clearly dealing with a lot of issues. Like, he's picked up a companion for the first time in we don't know how long for him, and he's sort of learning how to like relate and be kind to people again. So you have a two-parter, which is also written by Stephen Moffat, in which he's put into this weird sort of situation in World War II where there is some kind of body horror zombie plague that's affecting people. It's putting gas masks on them, and they would sort of wander around saying, "Are you my mommy?" But then you actually see the Doctor like go through so much in this episode, up to the point where he realizes that he can actually reverse it. And there's just this one line, this one shot that Eccleston delivers so brilliantly, just this joy. And you can tell how much he means it. Oh my gosh. It is just such a powerful, powerful episode. And it's really, like, it happened sort of like in the back half of the first season, but I think between that and the Dalek episode, those were the two episodes that really sort of showed that this show has legs, that you can keep sort of going with it. So there's going to be 3 specials that are going to be airing in November and early December. So outside of the UK and Ireland, they're going to be streaming exclusively on Disney+.
That's an interesting change.
And then when they do the brand new season, where we already know that a great actor from Sex Education named Ncuti Gatwa is going to become the 15th Doctor. Yeah. So those will be a Disney Plus series as well.
Just really quickly from both of you, if somebody, say myself, Caroline, people listening to the show who want to get started and start watching Doctor Who, what advice would you give, and where would you tell them to start?
I think I've got kind of what I said. I basically say start with the 11th Doctor. To me, that's a really good place. It's a really solid beginning, and it gets you going quite quick. Or just start right now, because I think it is going to be a bit of a reset, and just start picking it up where we're about to go.
Yeah, sort of the same idea there. So, I mean, obviously, like, we have not seen the specials of the new series yet, but we're hoping that it's going to be, say, a good, solid introduction, especially now that it's going to be more exposure with it through Disney Plus. But if you're going with what already exists, Kate's point about starting with what's known as Series 5, where Stephen Moffat comes over as the showrunner and Matt Smith begins, that is, for all intents and purposes, a good beginning. It is possible to start with the first series of New Who as well, with Christopher Eccleston. It's going to appear maybe to be just a little bit more sort of dated and shaky, but it's definitely well worth the payoff, especially if you want to watch sort of a great actor perform.
Okay, so our roundtable questions. First one, sent out a quiz to find out which Doctor are you. It seemed legit as far as online quizzes go. I've looked at quite a lot of them. I'm going to start with Diego. Diego, which Doctor are you?
So after taking the quiz, I wound up getting the 9th Doctor, Christopher Eccleston's Doctor, which maybe not the one I would have chosen for myself, but for reasons I've already gone into, a Doctor I love very much, and so will accept the results.
I also got the 9th Doctor, and I think it is because I said I picked chips as the food that I wanted to eat the most.
Yeah, no, he's the 9th Doctor was a bloke. He was definitely a bloke.
So I guess that makes me a bloke as well, because I also got the 9th Doctor. So, Kate, do we go 4 for 4?
some of the questions I was like, well, I know which doctor that is. Like, I could choose the one that I wanted. I tried to go with just my own feelings, and apparently I am a grumpy Scottish man because I got the 12th Doctor.
Lucky!
That surprised me a bit. I'm not sure which answer I gave that got me that one, but maybe it's just the fact that I am quite expressive in my eyebrows, and he is too. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I could, reading the summary at the end, I could pinpoint it to my more casual wardrobe and that I wanted to eat chips. Well, that is interesting. I don't quite know what to do with this, but I will process that. Second roundtable question. What is a show that's on today that you think we could be talking about 60 years from now?
I only have one answer for that. I wonder if Diego's is the same.
Is it Doctor Who?
Not.
It's Doctor Who. I tried to think of another one. Honestly, I was like, Bryce and I were talking about this last week briefly, and I was like, I can't think of a show that, honestly, like, yeah, you could say House of Dragons or something, but I'm like, will it? I'm not sure people will talk about it in 60 years. To me, the only one that has a chance is still Doctor Who, and maybe I'll still be alive for the 120th anniversary special.
So I had to give this some thought here. And so one of the advantages of Doctor Who had, as well as a lot of older properties like, say, Star Trek or what have you, was because it was it came on in like a few channel universe. And it also had like the luck to really sort of get itself positioned as being almost sort of like a national point of pride with the UK. So, if it lasted 26 years, even though, many people at the BBC were trying to kill it at various points in time, it's because it was sort of so well beloved, and because it's so well beloved that it had a chance to be sort of resurrected and brought back. Right now we are in a situation where there is so much on, and there's so many channels, there's so many ways to get to media, and honestly, like, a lot of shows are canceled now for far less. I don't think we have the conditions where we can create another Doctor Who. The only thing that could potentially come even close is maybe The Simpsons, which is at the halfway mark to 60 at this point here, or slightly past that, just over. Bryce would know. But beyond that, I don't know if anything else really has that same kind of immortality in a way, because we're not really sort of letting shows even get to that point. You know what I mean?
Well, and like Doctor Who, with its built-in or adapted method of being able to switch out actors, The Simpsons is an animated show. They're not aging. So, on there. Bryce, did Diego take your answer?
He did, but that's okay though. I thought about this hard. Yeah, Kate and I were in a meeting together, and it's kind of a little bit of a lull, and we were chatting about it for a bit. And to me, it's The Simpsons, just because, as Diego said, right now they're on season 35. There is, according to my notes, 758 episodes, so they're still trailing Doctor Who in less than half the time. So I also think, too, there's something about animated shows that are probably will live, they will continue to discover more in younger audiences, and with, hopefully not, but stuff with AI, I could see them, maybe continuing to produce episodes well into the future after maybe all the voice actors are no longer with us. So
I'm going with The Young and the Restless. I am absolutely, Guiding Light. I still mourn Guiding Light. It ended almost 15 years ago, but at the time, if you include radio, it was past 60 years. It was, I think, 70 on there. So I think if The Young and the Restless can make it through the current TV environment, the Diego was talking about, I think the generational long-form storytelling is what will keep it going. So I am all ready to be booked in 60 years from now to talk about what is happening in Genoa City. Thank you both so much for joining us today. We could not have done this episode without you. Is there anything coming up at EPL that you would like listeners to know about, Diego?
Absolutely, yes. So right here where I work at the Stanley Milner Library, in the second week of December, we are hosting Lord of the Rings Week. So we are going to be celebrating all things Lord of the Rings. There are still some classes that, as of the time of this recording, that people can sign up for, such as a workshop on how to 3D print your own rings, as well as, and I really want to stress this one here, a stage fighting workshop with one of Edmonton's best fight choreographers, Janine Waddell, who will be teaching people how to recreate one of the fights from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And all this ends with us airing the extended editions in the Mud Art Theatre on Saturday the 9th and Sunday the 10th. We'll be airing the extended editions of the trilogy in the Mud Art Theatre, and this is all for free.
But Kate, what's coming up with Capital City Press?
So we've got some fun things. If you are writing a novel for National Novel Writing Month, we've got some NaNoWriMo write-ins happening at different branches throughout the second half of this month. I'm not going to list all the different times and dates because there's a few of them. Some of them are being hosted by the municipal liaisons for Edmonton, and some are being hosted by our writer-in-residence, Kate Borman. So go online and check out those. You can see if there's one near you. We've got, in the beginning of December, it's not posted exactly at the moment recording this, but it should be December 2nd, so check and make sure I've got my dates right. Our featured writer will be hosting a memoir writing session, so that's Giselle General, and she'll be talking about memoir writing. And then likely at the time of this coming out, although I need to make sure things are lined up for this, if you are a writer and have a short story or work of creative nonfiction or a poem and you want it published, we're going to be having the call for Volume 4 of the Capital City Press Anthology going live, and it'll be up for 2 months, so you've got time. If you've got an idea and you want to write it, get it written and submit it for the anthology. This is an online anthology. You can check out the past ones at capitalcitypress.ca.
Wow. We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure that you're subscribed to the show so you get all of our new episodes. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and most importantly, tell a friend about the show.
Yeah, and don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. My condolences to whoever is doing up the show notes for this episode, because there's a lot of obscure stuff you're going to have fun finding. So you could also email us at podcast@epl.ca. Both Caroline and myself get those emails, and we love to hear from listeners. And you can share your thoughts about the show with us on Twitter, or as the cool kids call it, X, at epl.ca, and use the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.